this letter from the front. I have with me a letter from the front, or more accurately, a phone call from the front, from someone that has used and distributed Bible tracts for a long while now. He's now, very recently, I would call him a friend of mine. We had the opportunity to talk on the phone. He called our offices here at Bible Tracts Incorporated. We spoke at length on a story that he wanted to pass along to me. I'm so excited, with his permission, to tell you this, with some notes that I've taken from that phone call. The man's name who gave me this story, his name is Steve Taylor, and you can kind of call this a Tract and Truth Tuesday today, because we're definitely talking about the practical application of Bible tracts. Hopefully, prayerfully, we will have time for the Bible study by the end of the broadcast today. This man's name is Steve Taylor. He is what he called himself, a hospitalist. He works, of course, at a hospital. He's a medical doctor, works often around the ER and the ICU, and he had the opportunity to administer some medical help to a man named Eli. Now, I'm going to condense this story down for the short time frame of this radio broadcast, but if you would, for just a moment, put aside some distractions, listen to this amazing letter or phone call from the front. At some point in the future, I would love to have Steve Taylor on the broadcast to tell you in person. But Steve, of course, wears a white medical doctor's coat, as doctors do often, and in his front pocket he keeps some gospel tracts. Now, he has his stethoscope, of course, looking very doctorly, but he keeps himself supplied with tracts in his pocket. Let me give you a piece of practical advice. If you don't have tracts with you, you can't give them out. And Steve makes sure he keeps them with him. He had the chance one evening, a young man in his early 20s named Eli came into the hospital. Now, Eli was about to be dealing with some massive heroin withdrawals. Now, there's a very interesting story about Eli's life. Eli, in talking to Steve, they're going back and forth, and Steve is going to explain what he's going to be dealing with, anticipating and assuming that Eli had dealt with heroin withdrawals before. Eli tells him this really sad story. Eli's parents had been drug dealers in Puerto Rico, and they had migrated to the United States and had become very rich due to the drug trade. And Eli had always had a line of heroin throughout his life since he was 13 years old. He told Steve that he had never gone a day without heroin in his entire life since 13, likely the last 10 or 12 or 13 years of Eli's life. He had been constantly putting heroin into his body. So this idea of a heroin withdrawal was completely foreign to this young man, Eli. And Steve is just flabbergasted. He's taken aback that someone could go that long using heroin every single day. Now, the nurse that was with Steve was a Christian as well, and they take it upon themselves to describe withdrawals to this young man, Eli, so that he understands what he's going to be dealing with very soon. He's going to have to deal with just all sorts of illness, not have any appetite, just deal with just sickness, just all sorts of different things. I won't go into depth or graphic detail about what he was going to be dealing with, but just temperature changes of his body, all of these things, fever-like symptoms, flu-like symptoms, all these different things that Steve was telling Eli that he was going to be dealing with very shortly. Steve wrapped up the conclusion of that conversation was saying this: more than any of these medicines that I'm going to prescribe for you, what's going to help you more than anything else, more than the nursing care, more than our hospital, is this. And he handed him a gospel tract. Steve handed Eli a gospel tract. Eli takes that gospel tract from Steve. And Steve leaves the hospital. He's ending his shift and goes home for the evening. When Steve Taylor comes back the next day, the nurse comes to him, who was not in the room, I guess, when the gospel tract was given to Eli, and says, "You've got to come see Eli right now. And Steve is thinking that things have just been horrible for the young man, thinking that the heroin withdrawals were just absolutely monstrous and just completely taking over his entire night. Steve had told Eli that he likely would not be able to sleep. He'd be very restless, and just all the pains and ills and aches that go along with that sort of massive withdrawal from literally half a lifetime of heroin use. But the nurse said that's not what happened. That's not at all what happened. And Steve says, "What's going on?" And the nurse, almost with tears in her eyes, recounts the fact that Eli, the young man, had dealt with no symptoms at all night. Steve goes into the room, walks in, and Eli is sitting cross-legged on his bed, Indian style, with tears running down his face. And he recounts the story of Eli does, to Steve, that he read that tract in the night and had accepted Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior. Now, I cannot speak for the fact that his body did not suffer the aches and pains and illness of heroin withdrawal, but I can tell you the amazing change and the peace that passeth all understanding. Eli told Steve, "I've never felt peace like this in all my life." He accepted Christ as his Savior. And that night, that morning I should say, Steve got to see a young man be able to be checked out of the hospital, and he never heard from him again to this date. But I do know this: when the roll is called up yonder, a young man named Eli will be there by his own testimony. Praise God for that. Now, this story, this account, it's amazing. But really what's amazing is the work that Christ can do in a person's life through something as simple as a gospel tract.